Welcome to Nasdaq Trade Talks. I'm Jill Malandrino, global markets reporter at Nasdaq, with daily insight on the Nasdaq-100 Index, or the NDX, which is made up of 100 of the largest domestic and international non-financial innovative companies listed on the Nasdaq stock market. The NDX has been the barometer for U.S. large cap growth and also one of the best performing indexes over the last decade and a half, not to mention one of the most liquid index ecosystems in the world. Joining me today, we have Ben Jones, product development specialist with Nasdaq Index Research. Ben, it's great to have you with us. Welcome back to Trade Talks.
Thank you for having me on. Happy Friday.
Oh, yeah. Happy Friday indeed. And Ben, the Nasdaq 100 continues to maintain its lead. I mean, we could see that on our first chart here.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. I mean, there's tons of superlatives to be said about the Nasdaq 100 right now relative to a lot of market benchmarks. The momentum has been persistent. Time and time again, there have been, some days and some weeks where we have seen the Nasdaq 100 trail, but it's been, very short term. Bloomberg came out with a really interesting article that highlighted, some of this performance and some of these feats. And I quote, the Nasdaq 100 has beaten the S&P 500 for 7 straight days, 5 straight weeks, and 10 straight months. Out of that, it's up 23% this year, and since 8th of June, has beaten the broader market by 10 percentage points. So from a pure raw performance standpoint, we've seen the Nasdaq 100 outperform a really competitive benchmark, a really competitive index of the S&P 500. So you can see a lot of this short-term performance, right? 7 straight days, 5 straight weeks, but it's also long-term performance. And I think we just can't forget that. If you look at this chart, it looks at the Nasdaq 100 relative or compared to the S&P 500, going back the past 12 months, right? And you can see, how the Nasdaq 100 has really outperformed, for the most part since, fall of 2019 and even briefly during the summer, and really, took off as we kind of entered, the year against the S&P 500. So certainly a strong period for the Nasdaq 100. And this is not just against the S&P 500, if we think about performance, right? The Nasdaq 100 has been outperforming U.S. mid-cap. Nasdaq 100 has been outperforming U.S. small cap. So we see some really resilience here and some robustness relative to some other market benchmarks.
Yeah, then certainly people putting money to work with the modern day industrials, as we like to call the Nasdaq 100. And if we take a look at your next chart here, we're looking at relative strength, again, a longer term chart over a number of years of the Nasdaq 100 versus S&P.
Yeah, you can kind of see where I'm going with this concept and with this, topic, is that it's not just short-term performance, right? Yes, we've seen the Nasdaq 100, outperform, in 2020. Yes, we've seen it rebound, off of kind of those March 2020 lows. Some of these companies are in that innovative space, providing cloud services, providing technology services, and it appears that investors have an appetite for that and, are demanding, services for these companies, or, buying, these stocks, right? But again, this is not a recent phenomenon. If you look at the Nasdaq 100, if you look at its performance relative to the S&P 500, you can see how it's been outperforming for, over 5 years, right? So this is the Nasdaq 100 now compared to the S&P 500 on a relative strength chart. And this is using a relative strength ratio, comparing the performance and plotting it over time. If it's above that horizontal line down at the bottom, it's outperforming. When it's below, it's underperforming. And you can just see that slope of this line, right? The slope of the relative strength chart, continues to push higher and continues to outperform the broad market. What's interesting is that, if you look at a much longer term chart, we're beginning to see the Nasdaq 100, get back to, 2000 type levels, right? Again, kind of right around the tech bubble and the heart of it. We're beginning to see this ratio chart get to those levels, which is just another sign of just the type of momentum that is present in this index, relative to the market. I think a key point to remember, though, is that, what is this doing? Are we in a bubble? Is it overvalued? We have seen the PE of the Nasdaq 100 get higher. You get to relatively elevated levels. Looking at some recent data, it's right around 32 at 31.94. The S&P 500 is around 22 or 21.89. This places it kind of right below that 2004 high of 32.48. So we have seen the PE get elevated. We have seen it risen. Are we in bubble territory? That's up for debate. I'm not going to, have, an opinion on either side, but we have seen the PE increase, which there's a lot of discussion about that fact right now out there in a lot of different areas, whether it's research or different commentary.
And Ben, I would also argue that the way it looked in 99, 2000, the way it looked in 2004, the market is just very different in terms of fundamentals, in terms of structure. A lot of the companies that are driving the move forward didn't even exist then. And these are the companies that are going to be the economy for the next 50, 100 years, which is why I'm glad you brought up your last chart here when we look at the fundamentals over time, because this isn't just a phenomenon around the work from home environment we're in. These have been improving consistently.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. I mean, the Nasdaq-100 back in 2000 is very different than the Nasdaq-100 today, right? The market of the 2000s is very different than the market of today. What we're going through is very different than the market of the early 2000s. So the key is that it's not just about short-term performance. It's not just about what's happening in 2020. This has been a trend of improvement for well over a decade. So if we look at the fundamentals over time for the Nasdaq-100, we can see how it's been generally improving, right? From an earnings standpoint, we've seen earnings increase basically steadily over, really going back since 2003, 22 times, in fact, versus 4 times for the S&P 500. Nasdaq-100 revenues increasing at a steady, increasing pace, right? That's the middle side, 6.5 times versus 2 times for the S&P. And then dividends, right? We've seen dividends, increase 40 times, going back to 2003 versus, 3.5 for the S&P 100. So again, we're seeing improvement in the fundamental data for the Nasdaq-100 going back multiple years, right? And this is not just a recent phenomenon. So I think it's good news, right? Is that there is fundamental improvement. There's fundamental momentum, along with the technical momentum that we looked at from a relative strength standpoint.
All right, Ben. Thanks as always for joining us on Trade Talks.
Thank you.
All right, and thanks for joining me. I'm Jill Malandrino, Global Markets Reporter at Nasdaq.